The last time I caught my reflection in the brass-trimmed mirror behind the bar, hair escaping from its bun and exhaustion carved into every line of my face, I looked exactly like someone who'd been serving drinks and dodging handsy tourists for 12 straight hours. It was 1:30 on a Saturday morning during Mardi Gras season, and Le Crépuscule was finally beginning to thin out. The low thrum of jazz from the live band mixed with the clink of crystal glasses being cleared from tables, creating a rhythm I'd memorized over the 2 years I'd worked here. I was 26 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sore feet or aching shoulders. Working as a waitress in New Orleans' French Quarter wasn't what I'd imagined when I'd been studying linguistics and comparative literature at Tulane. But Anna had gotten sick during my junior year, and suddenly tuition didn't matter as much as hospital bills and experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. After she died, 2 years ago last month, I'd been left with her medical debt, a cramped apartment in Treem that still smelled like her lavender soap, and a grief that made finishing my degree feel impossible. Now I worked doubles at Le Crépuscule, an upscale restaurant that catered to the kind of clientele who thought nothing of dropping $500 on wine, and I counted my tips with the desperate focus of someone who needed every dollar just to stay afloat. The bracelet on my wrist caught the light as I wiped down table 12, a twisted circle of silver thorns that Anna had told me I'd been wearing when she found me. "You were maybe 6 months old," she'd said during one of our last conversations, morphine making her voice drift. "Wrapped in a blanket outside St. Louis Cathedral. Just you, that bracelet, and a note that said, 'Keep her safe.' I tried to take the bracelet off once thinking it might hurt you, but it wouldn't budge. Been there ever since." I'd never questioned the story. Why would I? Anna had been my mother in every way that mattered. The fact that we looked nothing alike, her dark and petite, me tall with honey blonde hair and eyes that sometimes looked more gold than hazel, had never bothered me. The strange things about myself, though, those I'd learned to hide. The way I could hear conversations 3 tables away if I focused. The craving for meat so rare it was practically raw. The dreams where I ran through swamps on 4 legs, or flew above the city with wings I didn't have. The aversion to silver that made serving from silver trays a special kind of torture I'd never admitted to anyone. Just quirks. Everyone had them. "Yuliya, you're still here?" Maurice, the floor manager, appeared from the kitchen with his usual expression of barely controlled stress. He was in his 50s, graying at the temples, with the look of someone who'd seen too many late nights. "Table 3 needs to be reset before you clock out." I glanced at the antique clock near the entrance. "Maurice, we're closed. Can't the morning shift? Please." Something in his voice made me stop. Not just tired, nervous, almost frightened. "Just do table 3, then you can go." I grabbed fresh linens from the supply closet, my feet screaming in protest. Table 3 sat in the main dining room beneath an original Degas, or so the owner claimed, positioned to offer a view of both the jazz stage and the street entrance. The restaurant had been designed to evoke old New Orleans aristocracy. Exposed brick, gas lamp fixtures converted to electric, velvet curtains the color of dried blood. The kind of place where the elite came to be seen, where a plate of étouffée cost $40 because the atmosphere was worth more than the food. I'd just finished spreading the ivory tablecloth when the front door opened. My first instinct was to politely inform whoever it was that we'd stopped seating an hour ago. The words were forming on my lips when Maurice materialized beside me, moving faster than I'd ever seen him move. His hand gripped my elbow hard enough to bruise. "Mr. Averlake," Maurice said, his voice climbing an octave. "We weren't expecting you tonight, but of course. Your usual table." I turned to look at the group that had entered, and my breath caught in my throat. There were 5 of them, all male, all dressed in suits that looked like they cost more than my annual rent. But it was the man in the center who commanded attention like gravity commanded falling objects. Inevitable, inescapable. He stood perhaps 6'3", with silver-white hair swept back from a face too beautiful to be entirely human. Even in the dim lighting, I could see his eyes were an unsettling shade of red, like garnets or fresh blood, and his skin had the kind of pallor that suggested he'd never seen sunlight. He moved with a predatory grace that made every instinct I'd spent 26 years suppressing suddenly scream in warning. Dangerous. This man was dangerous. Maurice. His voice was low, cultured, with the faintest trace of an Eastern European accent that made my name, a name I'd always thought sounded Russian but had no context for, suddenly feel significant. The private room will suffice. Of course, of course. Maurice was practically vibrating with anxiety. He turned to me, fingers digging into my arm. Yuliya, you'll be serving them tonight. My stomach dropped. Maurice, I've been here since noon. Can't Pierre? Pierre left an hour ago. His eyes were pleading now, desperate. Please, Yuliya. These are very important guests. Very important. I looked back at the men who were already moving toward the private dining room that took up the entire back corner of the restaurant. The silver-haired one, Averlake, Maurice had called him, glanced over his shoulder, and for just a heartbeat his crimson eyes met mine. The world tilted. Recognition slammed through me like lightning. Not memory exactly, but something deeper, something cellular. I knew those eyes. I'd seen them before. In dreams. In nightmares. In fragments of recollection that scattered like mercury whenever I tried to grasp them. He stopped walking. His companions continued past him, but he stood frozen, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Shock? Disbelief. Something raw and ancient that made my skin prickle with goosebumps despite the warm Louisiana air seeping through the restaurant's old walls. Then his eyes dropped to my wrist. To the bracelet. The world stopped. In the space of a breath, he crossed the 15 feet between us with speed that shouldn't have been possible. One moment he was by the entrance to the private room. The next, his hand was wrapped around my wrist, his skin ice-cold against mine, his eyes locked on the twisted silver thorns that had circled my wrist for as long as I could remember. This bracelet. His voice had gone rough, jagged with emotion I didn't understand. His grip tightened, not enough to hurt but enough that I couldn't pull away. Where did you get it? It wasn't really a question. It was an accusation, a demand, a prayer, and a threat all braided together in 4 words that made the restaurant suddenly feel like it was tilting on its axis. He rolled up his left sleeve with his free hand and I saw it. An identical bracelet. Twisted silver thorns, exact match to mine, encircling his pale wrist like a brand. You're supposed to be dead, he whispered, his crimson eyes searching my face with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I watched them take you. 25 years ago. I watched them take you. Behind him, his companions had stopped, turned, were staring at us with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. Maurice was making a strangled sound somewhere to my left. The jazz band had fallen silent, sensing something wrong in the air. But all I could focus on was this impossible man with my eyes, crimson where mine were gold, but the same shape, the same intensity, holding my wrist like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. Who are you? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded distant, disconnected. He released my wrist slowly, reluctantly, like it cost him something. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler but no less intense. My name is Nikolai Averlake. He paused and something devastated flickered across his beautiful, terrible face. And if you're wearing that bracelet, if you're really her, then you're my sister. The word hung in the air between us. Impossible, absurd, world-ending. Sister. And somewhere deep inside me, in a place I'd spent my entire life trying not to examine, something ancient and hungry stirred awake and whispered. Yes. Before we begin, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit that subscribe button if you are new here. Smash the like button if you're already hooked and drop a comment letting me know what country you're watching from. I love getting to know each of you. Also stay tuned because tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's get back to the story. The word sister was still echoing in my head when Maurice finally found his voice. Mr. Averlake, perhaps we should move this discussion to somewhere more private. Nikolai didn't even glance at him. His crimson eyes remained locked on my face, studying me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. His thumb traced the edge of the thorn bracelet on my wrist and I felt something electric pass between us. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Like 2 magnets discovering they'd been torn from the same source. Clear the restaurant, he said softly, though his voice carried with absolute authority. Yao. One of his companions, a broad-shouldered man with dark hair and eyes like chips of amber, moved with fluid grace toward Maurice. You heard him. Everyone out. You'll be compensated generously for the inconvenience. His accent was Russian, thicker than Nikolai's, and there was something in the way he moved that reminded me of the feral cats that prowled the quarter alleys. Maurice sputtered protests about protocol and procedures, but within minutes the restaurant was emptying. The jazz band packed up without question, their eyes carefully averted. The remaining waitstaff fled through the kitchen entrance. Even the bartender, usually stubborn about his closing routine, vanished like smoke. When the last person had gone and the heavy front door swung shut, the silence felt oppressive. Nikolai still hadn't released my wrist. His voice cracked on the word and I realized with a start that he was close to breaking. I didn't understand Russian. I'd never studied it, never even been particularly interested in it, but the name hit me like a physical blow. Elena. Elaine. Something deep in my chest lurched, and for just a moment I smelled something that shouldn't be possible. Wood smoke and snow, blood and wildflowers, a scent memory from a life I'd never lived. I don't understand what you're saying. My voice came out smaller than I intended. My name is Yuliya. Yuliya Shvets. Anna was my mother and I'm human and I think you've made some kind of mistake. Look at me. His free hand came up to cup my face with surprising gentleness. Really look at me and tell me you don't see it. I forced myself to meet his eyes and the world tilted again. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. Same bone structure, same sharp cheekbones and straight nose, same full mouth that looked cruel until it softened. The coloring was different, his hair silver white where mine was honey blonde, his eyes crimson where mine were gold. But the architecture underneath was identical. No, I whispered, but even as I said it, I felt something stirring inside me. Something hungry and wild that had been caged my entire life, rattling the bars. This isn't possible. You're not, I'm not. My vision blurred. The restaurant lights suddenly seemed too bright, too sharp. I could hear things I shouldn't be able to hear. Morris's panicked breathing 3 blocks away as he fled toward his car, the scurrying of rats in the walls, the slow drip of a leaking pipe in the basement. And beneath it all, a sound like drums. No, not drums. Heartbeats. I could hear everyone's heartbeats, including my own, which was racing like a trapped bird. What's happening to me? I gasped, trying to pull away from Nikolai, but his grip had become iron. You're waking up, he said grimly. Your body knows what your mind won't accept. Yuliya, Elaine, you need to come with me. Right now. There are people who will know about this encounter within the hour and they will send hunters. You're not safe here. Hunters. The word came out as a laugh, high and brittle. This is insane. You're insane. I need you to let go of me so I can. Pain ripped through me like lightning. It started in my hands, a burning that spread up my arms and into my chest. I looked down and watched in horror as my fingers began to change. The nails lengthened into curved claws, sharp and gleaming. My bones cracked and reformed, the sound sickeningly wet. I tried to scream but my jaw was changing too, teeth elongating into fangs that cut into my lower lip. No, 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 I was babbling, my voice distorting. Make it stop, please make it stop. Nikolai caught me as my knees buckled. Breathe, he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. Don't fight it. Fighting makes it worse. I can't, I'm human, this isn't. You're not human, he said, and there was infinite sadness in his voice. You never were. You're like our mother was. Hybrid. Half vampire, half werewolf. The rarest and most dangerous thing in our world. The words should have sounded like fantasy, like the plot of some bad movie. But my body believed them. My body was betraying everything I thought I knew about myself, transforming into something monstrous while I watched helplessly. The claws retracted slightly, the fangs receded, but the pain continued, waves of it crashing through me in a rhythm that felt almost like labor, like something being born. Get her to the car, Nikolai ordered. The broad-shouldered man, Radomir, I heard him called, moved to help, but Nikolai snarled at him, an inhuman sound that raised every hair on my body. I'll carry her. Open the back entrance. The world became a blur of movement. Nikolai lifted me like I weighed nothing, moving through the restaurant's back corridors with impossible speed. I caught glimpses. The alley behind Le Crepuscule, a black car that looked like it cost more than my apartment building, leather seats that smelled like money, and something metallic I didn't want to identify. Stay with me, Nikolai murmured, and I realized I was fading, the pain dragging me toward unconsciousness. We're almost there. Just hold on, Elaine. I won't lose you again. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was his face hovering above mine, those impossible crimson eyes bright with tears he wouldn't let fall, and I thought, he really believes it. He really thinks I'm his sister. And somewhere in the depths of my fragmenting consciousness, a small voice whispered, "What if he's right?" 2 weeks had passed since the night my world shattered, and I still wasn't sure which parts of me were real and which were the monster wearing my skin. "Again," Gregor Stanislavski said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. He stood across from me in the compound's training room, a cavernous space beneath Nikolai's Garden District mansion that had been reinforced with steel and something else, something that hummed with power I was learning to recognize as magic. Extend the claws, but only the right hand. Control is everything. I closed my eyes, reaching for that wild thing inside me that had been caged for 26 years. It was getting easier to find, which terrified me almost as much as the hunger that came with it. The craving for blood that woke me at 3 in the morning, mouth-watering, fangs already descended before I was fully conscious. My right hand burned. I felt the bones shift, felt my nails elongate into curved talons sharp enough to tear through steel. When I opened my eyes, Gregor nodded approvingly. "Better. Now retract them without shifting the rest of your hand." The effort made sweat break out across my forehead, but I managed it. The claws slid back, bones reformed, and my hand looked almost human again. Almost. There was still something wrong about it, something that made people instinctively nervous when they looked too long. "Good." Gregor's smile revealed fangs he didn't bother hiding. He was ancient. Nikolai said he'd been turned during the reign of Ivan the Terrible, and it showed in the way he moved, like gravity was optional. "Tomorrow we work on speed. But for now, rest. Tatiana will be here within the hour for your lycanthropy session." I wanted to protest that I couldn't possibly train twice in one day, but the full moon was 3 nights away, and according to everyone who kept looking at me with varying degrees of pity and concern, I needed to learn control before my first shift or risk losing myself entirely. Gregor left and I collapsed onto the mat, every muscle screaming. The door at the top of the stairs opened, and I smelled Nikolai before I heard his footsteps. A scent like winter and old books and something coppersweet that made my stomach clench with unwanted hunger. "How did it go?" he asked, descending the stairs with that preternatural grace that still unnerved me. "I didn't accidentally claw anyone's face off, so I'm calling it a win." I sat up, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Gregor says I'm progressing faster than expected. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment rather than a sign that I'm turning into a complete monster ahead of schedule." Nikolai's expression flickered with something I was learning to recognize as pain. He sat beside me on the mat, close but not touching. We'd been careful about that, the touching. The twin bond we apparently shared made physical contact overwhelming, a flood of emotions we were both still learning to navigate. "Being a monster is easy," he said quietly, staring at his hands. "Choosing not to be takes centuries. I'm still working on it." That's not exactly reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. He looked at me then, those crimson eyes that were becoming familiar. "I've killed people, Yuliya. Hundreds of them over the years. Some deserved it. Most didn't. I ruled through fear and violence because that's what my father taught me, and because after Mother died, I didn't care enough to find another way. The honesty was brutal and I appreciated it. Everyone else in the compound treated me like I might break at any moment. Nikolai treated me like I was already broken, and there was something freeing about not having to pretend otherwise. "The bloodlust," I said, hating how my voice shook. "It's getting worse. This morning I caught myself staring at Morris's neck. He came by to check if I was okay, and all I could think about was how easy it would be to just take. How good it would taste. What did you do?" "Locked myself in the bathroom until he left." I laughed, but it came out bitter. Anna raised me to be a good person. To help people, not hurt them. And now I'm sitting here fantasizing about drinking my friend's blood like it's a fine wine. Nikolai was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you remember anything from before?" It was a question he'd asked variations of a dozen times, always gentle, never pushing. And every time I gave him the same answer, just fragments. Feelings more than memories. Sometimes I dream about a boy with silver hair who used to make me laugh. And there's this sense of safety, of being protected, but I never knew from what. That was me. His voice had gone soft. "I was 3 when they took you, but I remember. You had this laugh. This ridiculous, snorting laugh that would make Father smile even when he was trying to be stern. And you were fearless. You'd crawl toward danger instead of away from it, and Mother would say you'd inherited the wolf's courage along with its claws." Something in my chest tightened. Nikolai. There's something I want to show you, he interrupted, standing and offering me his hand. If you're ready. I took it and the rush of emotion nearly buckled my knees. His grief ancient and vast. His fierce protectiveness. His guilt over losing me, over not saving me, over every year we'd spent apart. And underneath it all, a desperate hope that maybe somehow we could salvage something from the wreckage. He led me through the mansion's winding corridors, past rooms filled with priceless art and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. The compound was massive, 3 stories above ground, 2 below, sprawling across a property that took up an entire city block. Servants moved through it like ghosts, never quite meeting my eyes, and I'd learned not to ask too many questions about who and what they were. We stopped before a set of double doors on the 3rd floor. Nikolai's hand trembled slightly as he pushed them open. These were our parents' chambers, he said. I've kept them exactly as they were. The room took my breath away. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. A space caught in time, preserved like an insect in amber. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the center, its burgundy curtains tied back with gold cord. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes in languages I couldn't read. And everywhere photographs. A dark-haired man with Nikolai's features and my smile. A woman with wild blonde hair and eyes that shifted between gold and green depending on the light. Mother was Pack Alpha before she met father, Nikolai explained, his voice rough. The Volkov Pack, one of the oldest in North America. Tatiana, who you'll meet shortly, is from a branch of that same lineage. Mother gave up her position when she bound herself to father, and it caused complications. I moved through the room as if in a dream, touching things carefully. A hairbrush with blonde strands still tangled in the bristles. A man's pocket watch stopped at 3:14. A leather journal on the nightstand, its pages yellow with age. Can I asked, picking up the journal. It's yours as much as mine. I opened it and my mother's handwriting spilled across the pages. The entries were dated, starting from what looked like shortly after she met my father. Love letters, I realized. Passionate, desperate, defiant love letters between 2 people who knew their union would tear their worlds apart but chose each other anyway. Dmitri says the council is demanding we end this, one entry read. Victor was here today making thinly veiled threats about bloodline purity and the corruption of vampire society. He doesn't understand or refuses to. We're not destroying anything. We're creating something new. Something beautiful. Yes, there will be enemies. Yes, there will be consequences. But when I hold my son, our son, I know it's worth it. My hands shook as I turned the pages, watching my parents' story unfold. Their secret wedding. The outrage from both vampire and werewolf communities. The birth of Nikolai, who they'd hoped would bridge 2 worlds. And then months later another entry. I'm pregnant again. Dmitri is terrified and I can't blame him. The council's threats have become more direct, more violent. But I can feel her, this daughter growing inside me, and she's strong. Stronger than Nikolai perhaps. She'll be hybrid, I can sense it already. Half vampire, half wolf. An impossibility made flesh. Victor says she'll be an abomination. I say she'll be proof that love transcends species, that life finds a way even when fear and hatred try to prevent it. Tears blurred my vision. She knew, I whispered. She knew what I'd be and she wanted me anyway. Nikolai stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from his skin. They both did. And it got them killed. Before I could respond, the door burst open. Radomir stood there, his usually composed face tight with alarm. Nikolai. Viktor Chernov is here. He's demanding an audience. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Tell him to schedule an appointment like everyone else. He brought half the Crimson Council with him. Radomir's eyes flickered to me, something like apology in them. They're not leaving until you speak with them. And they know about her. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Nikolai's hand found mine, gripping tight enough to hurt. Then I suppose we shouldn't keep them waiting, he said, his voice gone cold and dangerous. He looked at me and I saw the vampire king in him for the first time. Not my brother but the creature who'd ruled the supernatural underworld through fear. Stay close to me. Don't speak unless spoken to directly. And whatever happens, remember, you are my sister, my blood, my heir. They'll have to go through me to reach you. We descended the stairs together, my hand still clutched in his. walking toward a confrontation that would determine whether I lived long enough to survive my first full moon. The council's archive was supposed to be impenetrable. 3 feet of reinforced concrete steel doors with locks that required both key and blood signature, and wards strong enough to make my hybrid nature scream and protest the moment we crossed the threshold. But Nikolai was Vampire King, and some doors opened for him whether they wanted to or not. "We have maybe 20 minutes before the night guards complete their rotation," he whispered, moving through the darkness with predatory certainty. "What we're looking for will be in the historical records section. Anything documenting hybrid births, executions, or purges." I followed close behind, my enhanced vision cutting through the gloom. The archive stretched before us like a library from a nightmare, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound volumes and scrolls that smelled of decay and old magic. Some of these records predated the founding of New Orleans itself, brought over from the old world by vampires fleeing persecution or seeking new hunting grounds. "Here," Nikolai breathed, pulling down a volume marked with symbols I couldn't read. He opened it carefully, the ancient pages crackling under his touch. "Recorded births within council territories, 1823 to 1847. If hybrids have happened before, there will be documentation. Vampires are meticulous about bloodline records." We worked in tense silence, pulling volume after volume, cross-referencing dates and names. And slowly, horribly, a pattern emerged. Hybrid births noted in careful script, always marked with the same notation: purged. Handled by VC. Viktor Chernov, I said, my voice barely audible. "He's been doing this for centuries." Nikolai's jaw was clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "Not just him. Look at this." He showed me another volume, this one from the 1920s. A werewolf alpha named Irina Kozlov fell in love with a vampire merchant. She bore him twin daughters. Both hybrids. Both dead within a week of birth, along with their parents. Ruled a necessary purge to maintain bloodline purity. My stomach churned. "How many?" "At least 24 that I can find, and these are just the documented cases." He pulled down another tome, this one so old it nearly disintegrated in his hands. "Our parents weren't the first forbidden union. They were just the first to make it public, to refuse to hide or apologize for what they'd created." I found a journal tucked behind a row of execution records, its cover unmarked but its pages filled with Victor's handwriting. My hands shook as I read his meticulous notes. Locations of hybrid children, methods of execution, strategies for convincing parents that death was mercy. And threaded through it all, a twisted logic that made my blood run cold. "The hybrid corruption threatens everything our kind has built," one entry read. "They are stronger than pure vampires, faster than werewolves, and their very existence proves that our species' superiority is a lie. If hybrids are allowed to live and breed, they will eventually replace us. The purges are not murder. They are survival." "He really believes it," I whispered. "He thinks he's protecting vampire society." "He's protecting his power," Nikolai corrected, his voice hard. "Fear keeps both vampires and werewolves divided. Division keeps them weak. Weak populations need strong leaders. Victor has been manufacturing this war for centuries, and hybrid children are the casualties." A sound echoed through the archive, footsteps, still distant but approaching. Nikolai grabbed my arm and we fled through a side exit, taking 3 volumes with us that we couldn't afford to leave behind. We didn't speak again until we were back at the compound, door locked, wards reactivated. "Tatiana needs to see this," Nikolai said finally. "If there are other hybrids out there, they deserve to know the truth." Tatiana Volkov arrived at dawn, bringing with her a woman named Solange who looked young but moved with the wariness of someone much older. They sat in Nikolai's study while I laid out what we'd found, watching their expressions shift from shock to horror to grim understanding. "We suspected," Tatiana said quietly. "There have always been rumors of hybrids who survived, who went into hiding. But we never had proof that it was systematic." "There's more than rumors," Solange added. Her voice carried traces of a French accent, and I noticed her eyes shifted color when she was agitated, brown to amber to green. "There are survivors. Not many, but enough. We have a sanctuary in the bayou, hidden under layers of concealment magic. Hybrids who escaped Victor's purges, or whose parents managed to fake their deaths." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "How many?" 14 that we know of. Ages ranging from 5 to 93. All living in fear, all believing they're the only ones left. She looked at me with something like hope. You could change that. You're Nikolai's sister, heir to the vampire throne. Your existence legitimizes ours. Or paints an even bigger target on all of you, I countered. Perhaps. But we're tired of hiding. Solange stood, her decision made. Tomorrow night, if you're willing, I'll take you to the sanctuary. Let our people see that they're not alone. The Bayou Sanctuary was everything I'd expected and nothing I was prepared for. Built on a floating platform deep in the swamp, concealed by magic so old it tasted like moss and midnight, it housed the impossible, hybrids who'd survived Victor's centuries of genocide. They watched me with expressions ranging from hope to suspicion as Solange made introductions. A teenage girl named Celeste who'd been hiding in the bayou for 3 years after her werewolf mother died, protecting her from vampire hunters. An elderly man called Bastien who'd witnessed his own parents' execution in 1952 and fled to New Orleans, living on society's margins ever since. A pair of twins, actually twins like Nikolai and me, who'd been separated at birth and only found each other 2 decades later. Each story was a variation on the same theme. Love that crossed species boundaries, children who paid the price, and Victor's hunters always one step behind. The war between vampires and werewolves wasn't ancient history or cultural inevitability. It was manufactured, maintained, weaponized to keep both populations afraid and divided. Your parents understood this, Bastien told me, his aged hands trembling as he showed me a photograph. My mother and father, younger than in Nikolai's preserved chambers, standing with a group of vampires and werewolves. They were building a coalition. Dmitri had convinced several vampire lords that partnership with werewolf packs would strengthen both species. Svetlana had her pack's blessing. They were going to present their union, and you twins, as proof that cooperation was possible. And Victor couldn't allow that, I finished, the pieces finally clicking into place. Because unity would end his power. Exactly. Back at the compound, Radomir was waiting in Nikolai's study, his face ashen. He looked at me, then at Nikolai, and I saw him make a decision that cost him something. I need to tell you both something, he said, his voice rough. Something I should have confessed 25 years ago. Nikolai went very still. Radomir. I was there. The night your parents died. I was part of Victor's attack force. The words came out in a rush, like poison he'd been holding in too long. I was 19, barely turned, and Victor said we were stopping a corruption that threatened all vampires. I believed him. I followed orders. The temperature in the room plummeted. Nikolai's eyes had gone completely black, a sign of rage I'd learned to recognize. You killed my parents. I killed vampires who defended them. I don't know if my blade found your father or mother. Everything was chaos. Screaming, blood, your mother in half-wolf form trying to protect 2 cribs while your father held off a dozen attackers. Radomir's voice broke. I heard her screaming for her children. Heard your father begging Victor to spare you both. And I did nothing. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. Why are you telling us this now? Because I kept evidence. He pulled a wrapped bundle from his coat, unfolding it to reveal a blade crusted with dried blood. My weapon from that night. I couldn't bring myself to clean it, couldn't forget what I'd done. I've had it tested. The blood belongs to Dmitri Avrelake, Svetlana Volkov, and Viktor Chernov. Nikolai moved so fast I barely saw it, slamming Radomir against the wall with inhuman strength. Victor's blood. Explain. He delivered the killing blows personally. I saw him drive his own blade into your father's heart, then tear out your mother's throat while she was still trying to reach the cribs. Tears tracked down Radomir's face. He wanted their deaths to be his triumph. And then he took infant Elaine. Took you, and I thought he was going to kill you right there. But Svetlana's packmate Anna grabbed you and ran. Victor let her go. He said a human woman and an infant would die in the swamps anyway. The silence that followed was absolute. Nikolai released Radomir slowly, his hands shaking with the effort of not simply ripping the man's throat out. We have proof now, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Physical evidence that Victor orchestrated the massacre. We can bring this to the council. No. Nikolai's voice was cold. Victor already knows we're investigating. Look. He showed me his phone and I felt the world tilt. News articles from vampire and werewolf networks across the South, all with variations of the same headline: Vampire King harbors hybrid abomination. Photographs of me entering and leaving the compound. Testimonies from concerned citizens about vampire children murdered by hybrid rage. Calls for my immediate execution. He's manufacturing a crisis, I breathed. Just like he did with our parents. Worse. Nikolai's jaw was tight. He's turning public opinion against you specifically, making your existence the threat. And tomorrow night, the council meets to discuss my fitness to rule. Victor will demand I execute you or abdicate so someone who can take my place. Then we expose him first. With what evidence? A blade that could be explained away, archives that Victor controls, and the testimony of hybrids who legally shouldn't exist. Nikolai moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. He's been planning this for centuries. We've had 3 weeks. But I was seeing something else now, a pattern in Victor's strategy. He needs public support. Needs both vampires and werewolves afraid enough to accept another purge. What if we remove that fear? What if we show them that hybrids aren't the threat? Victor is. Nikolai turned to look at me and I saw hope kindle in his ancient eyes. What are you suggesting? Tomorrow night at the council meeting, we don't just defend my existence. We put Victor on trial for centuries of genocide. I picked up Radimir's blade, the weight of it feeling like justice waiting to be served. And we let the hybrid community, all 14 survivors plus me, stand as witnesses to what he's done. Let the council see that the real abomination isn't us. It's the monster who's been murdering children to maintain his power. It was a terrible plan with a dozen ways to fail. But as I looked at Nikolai, at Radimir still trembling with guilt, at Tatiana and Solange watching from the doorway, I saw the same desperate hope reflected in all their faces. We had one chance to end this. One chance to finish what our parents started 25 years ago. And if we failed, Victor wouldn't just kill me. He'd use my death to justify another century of genocide, another generation of hybrid children hunted like animals. The full moon was 2 nights away. The council meeting was tomorrow. And somewhere in the quarter, Viktor Chernov was sharpening his knives, confident that this time, the abomination would be purged permanently. He was about to learn what our mother had known. Hybrids weren't the end of vampire or werewolf society. We were the future neither species was ready for. The summons arrived at midnight, delivered by a vampire so old his skin looked like parchment stretched over bone. Nikolai read it in silence, his expression growing darker with each line, before crumpling the paper in his fist hard enough to draw blood from his palm. They want me at the council chambers tomorrow night, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Charges of harboring an illegal hybrid in violation of the purity laws, dated back to 1847. They're giving me 2 options. Bring you for immediate execution or abdicate my position as vampire king so someone more compliant can take my place. I was sitting in the study, supposedly reading one of our mother's journals, but I'd been staring at the same page for an hour. And if you refuse both? Then Victor and his faction will come here. At the full moon when you're most vulnerable. Nikolai's eyes met mine and I saw the calculation there, the terrible mathematics of power and sacrifice. He's demanding I surrender you or he brings war to our doorstep. Radimir, standing guard by the door, shifted uncomfortably. The compound's defenses are strong, but not against a full council assault. And if they time it with your transformation. I know. Nikolai's voice was flat. Which is why we need to move you before then. Tatiana's offered sanctuary in the bayou at least until... Until what? I closed the journal carefully, fighting to keep my voice steady. Until Victor gets bored and gives up? Until enough vampires die that the council decides one hybrid isn't worth a civil war? How long am I supposed to hide, Nikolai? As long as it takes to keep you alive. While you lose everything you've built. Your position, your authority, maybe your life. I stood, moving to the window that overlooked the garden district. Gas lamps flickered in the darkness, illuminating streets that had no idea monsters were real, let alone that those monsters were about to go to war over whether I deserved to exist. Our parents didn't hide. They stood together and forced both societies to acknowledge what they'd created. Maybe it's time I did the same. They died, Yuliya. Nikolai's voice cracked on my name. They stood together and Victor murdered them both. I won't lose you the same way. But I could see it now, the shape of what needed to happen. Victor's power came from fear. Fear of hybrids, fear of change, fear of a future where vampire supremacy wasn't guaranteed. The only way to break that power was to prove the fear was manufactured. That hybrids weren't mindless monsters but people capable of choice and restraint. People like me. I waited until 3 in the morning when even vampires slept. The letter I left on Nikolai's desk was brief. You saved me once. My turn to save you. Trust me. I'd signed it with both names, Yuliya and Elaine, because I was finally beginning to understand I could be both. The compound's security was designed to keep threats out, not keep me in. I slipped through the garden, over the wall, and into the French Quarter streets still alive with tourists and music and life that would continue whether I lived or died. The council chambers were in an old Creole mansion on Royal Street, hidden behind iron gates and wards that made my hybrid nature scream in protest. The guards at the entrance looked surprised to see me walking up alone, but they'd been given orders. They opened the gates without a word, and I walked into what might be my execution with my head high and my mother's journal clutched against my chest. The council chamber was everything I'd expected. Ancient vampires arranged in a semicircle, their faces beautiful and terrible and empty of mercy. Viktor Chernov sat at the center, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my apartment, his expression carefully arranged into something that might pass for compassion if you didn't look too closely. Yuliya Shvets, he said, his voice carrying false warmth. Or should I say Elaine Averlake? How kind of you to spare us the trouble of retrieving you. I came to answer your charges, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And to present evidence that this tribunal is based on lies. A ripple of interest moved through the assembled vampires. Victor's smile never wavered. Child, you're not to blame for what you are. An accident of birth, nothing more. But the law is ancient and absolute. Hybrids cannot be allowed to exist. They corrupt bloodlines, weaken our society, and threaten everything we've built. Your execution will be quick and painless. A mercy, really. Mercy. I opened our mother's journal, finding the entry I'd marked. Like the mercy you showed the Kozlov twins in 1924? Or the mercy you gave to Bastien Rousseau's parents in 1952? Or the mercy you extended to my mother when you tore out her throat while she begged you to spare her children? The chamber went silent. Victor's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into false concern. I don't know what lies your brother has been feeding you. It's not lies. It's documented. I pulled out the archives we'd stolen, laying them on the council's table. 2 centuries of hybrid births, all marked with your initials. All purged within days of discovery. You didn't just execute my parents, Victor. You've been systematically murdering children for generations, convincing both vampires and werewolves that the war between our species is necessary when really it just maintains your power. Some of the council members were leaning forward now, examining the documents. I pressed my advantage, pulling out Radimir's blade wrapped in cloth. This weapon was used the night my parents died. It's been tested. The blood on it belongs to Dmitry Averlake, Svetlana Volkov, and Viktor Chernov. I met Victor's eyes, saw rage beginning to burn through his careful mask. You didn't just order their deaths. You killed them yourself. Lies from a desperate hybrid, Victor said, but his voice had lost its warmth. Anyone could have planted that evidence. Anyone could have forged those documents. The council knows my loyalty. Then explain how I know your blade entered my father's heart from the left side. The voice came from the chamber entrance, and my twin bond sang with recognition before I even turned around. Explain how I know you severed the major artery first, making him watch as he bled out. Explain how you described his final moments to me in such detail when you supposedly weren't even present for the attack. Nikolai stood in the doorway, flanked by Radimir, Tatiana, and at least 24 vampires and werewolves I recognized from the Bayou Sanctuary. His eyes were black with rage, and when he looked at me, I felt his terror and fury and desperate relief crash through our bond like a tsunami. She's my sister, he said, moving into the chamber with predatory grace. My twin. My blood. My heir. He came to stand beside me, and the council chamber suddenly felt very small. By vampire law, declaring her my heir legitimizes her existence. She has claim to protection, to title, to every right afforded to direct descendants of vampire nobility. Victor stood, his composure finally cracking. You'd give a hybrid claim to the throne? You'd doom us all for sentiment. I'd give us a chance to be more than killers and tyrants. Nikolai's hand found mine, our matching bracelets touching. Our parents saw what you refused to, that strength comes from unity, not division. That hybrids aren't corruption but evolution. You've spent centuries manufacturing fear to maintain control, Victor. That ends tonight. Then you've chosen your side. Victor's smile was terrible. Council, seize the traitor and his abomination. Half the vampires in the room moved. The other half moved to block them. And suddenly the ancient chamber erupted into chaos. I'd trained for this. 3 weeks of Gregor's brutal instruction, Tatiana's werewolf combat techniques, learning to blend vampire speed with werewolf strength. But training wasn't the same as fighting for your life while ancient vampires tried to tear you apart. A councilwoman lunged for me, fangs extended. I moved on instinct, faster than thought, catching her wrist and twisting until bone cracked. Not killing, that was important. I disabled her instead, using exactly enough force to stop the threat without ending her existence. Another attacker, this one moving with centuries of experience. I dropped low, letting him overextend, then swept his legs with werewolf strength that sent him crashing into the wall. Still alive. Still breathing. She's showing restraint, someone shouted over the chaos. The hybrid is choosing not to kill. Victor moved through the melee like death itself, and I realized too late that I'd been his target all along. His hand closed around my throat with crushing force, lifting me off the ground. Your parents died screaming, he hissed, his beautiful face twisted with hatred. Join them. Then Nikolai was there, slamming into Victor with enough force to shatter the council table. They rolled apart, circling each other like the predators they were. Brother versus advisor. King versus usurper. And I realized with horrible clarity that Nikolai was older, but Victor had been training for this confrontation for centuries. Victor's blade caught Nikolai across the ribs, opening a wound that would have killed anything human. Nikolai staggered and Victor moved in for the killing blow. I hit him like a freight train, my hybrid nature finally unleashed completely. Vampire speed, werewolf strength, and something else, something uniquely mine. We crashed through the chamber wall, plaster and brick exploding around us. Victor recovered faster than I expected, his blade finding my shoulder. Pain erupted white hot, but I held on, using my weight to pin him down while Nikolai recovered. Together we overpowered him, not easily, not cleanly, but inevitably. The blade clattered from his hand and suddenly he was beneath us, fangs bared in a snarl of pure hatred. Kill me, he spat. Prove you're the monster I said you were. My hand closed around his throat. It would be so easy. One twist, and the creature who'd murdered my parents, who'd hunted hybrid children for centuries, who'd engineered wars to maintain his power, would be gone. No, I said and watched shock replace the hatred in his eyes. You live. In a cell. Watching us build what you tried to destroy. Watching hybrid children grow up safe. Watching vampires and werewolves work together. Your punishment isn't death, it's irrelevance. I released him, stepping back. The chamber had gone silent, both factions watching. Waiting to see what this hybrid would do, whether mercy or vengeance would win. One of the elder councilwomen who'd remained neutral through the fighting stepped forward. The hybrid chose restraint when she could have chosen violence. She protected life when ending it would have been easier. She looked around at the assembled vampires. We've been told hybrids are mindless beasts. But I've just watched one demonstrate more control and mercy than most pure vampires achieve in centuries. The law is clear, another councilman protested. Hybrids are. The law was written by Victor, Tatiana interrupted, stepping into the chamber with the Bayou Sanctuary survivors behind her. To justify genocide. To maintain fear. These are the hybrids who survived his purges. 14 souls who've been hiding in terror because Victor convinced you their existence was threat enough to warrant execution. Look at them. Do they look like monsters? The vote, when it came, split the council down the middle. But a slim majority sided with Nikolai, and that was enough. The purity laws were suspended pending review. Hybrids would be granted provisional protection under vampire law. Victor and his closest supporters were placed under arrest. But as the guards led Victor away, I saw the smile on his face. Not defeat. Not acceptance. Promise. His supporters fled, Radomir reported quietly. At least 24 vampires, including several ancient houses. They vowed to continue the fight. Nikolai's arm came around my shoulders and I felt his exhaustion through our twin bond. We won tonight. But the war isn't over. I looked at the shattered council chamber, at the vampires and werewolves standing together in uneasy alliance, at the hybrid survivors watching me like I was something between a hero and a harbinger. My shoulder throbbed where Victor's blade had cut deep, and I could feel my first transformation approaching with tomorrow's full moon. No, I agreed, leaning into my brother's cold embrace. It's just beginning. 6 weeks after the council chamber battle, Viktor Chernov sat in a cell beneath the Garden District compound, and the supernatural world was still reeling from what his imprisonment meant. Every night, reports came in, vampire houses declaring their refusal to recognize hybrid legitimacy, werewolf packs split between those who saw me as bridge and those who saw me as contamination. Nikolai's position as vampire king was secure, but the political landscape had been transformed into something none of us fully understood yet. Including me. Hybrid HEIR sounded impressive until you realized no one knew what it actually meant. Was I vampire royalty? Werewolf nobility? Something entirely new that both species would spend centuries trying to define? The questions kept me awake during the day when I should have been sleeping, my hybrid nature still adjusting to a schedule that satisfied neither vampire nor wolf instincts. On a cool February evening, Nikolai found me in the library surrounded by legal texts and historical records, trying to understand the precedent for what I'd become. There isn't one, he said as if reading my thoughts. He'd gotten better at that. The twin bond between us had strengthened over the weeks, until sometimes I couldn't tell where my emotions ended and his began. You're writing the precedent, Yuliya. That's what makes this terrifying and necessary in equal measure. I closed the book I'd been pretending to read. I need to visit them. Our parents. I know you go every week, but I haven't been back since I learned who they were. Since I learned who I was. Then let's go together. Lafayette Cemetery No. 1 was beautiful in the fading light, above-ground tombs casting long shadows across the narrow paths. Our parents' mausoleum was simple compared to some of the ornate structures around it. Nikolai said they'd wanted something understated, a place where both vampires and werewolves could pay respects without feeling like they were on enemy territory. I carried red roses, vampire tradition for honoring the dead. Nikolai carried wolfsbane, the werewolf custom. We placed them together at the tomb's entrance, and I read the inscription for what felt like the 100th time. Dmitry Averlake and Svetlana Volkov. They dared to love. We should have grown up together, I said, the anger I'd been suppressing finally breaking through. I should remember them, remember you, remember what it felt like to be part of something instead of always feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere. They stole that from us. Victor, the council, everyone who decided their fear mattered more than 2 children who deserved a family. Nikolai was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. We have eternity now. However long eternity means for creatures like us. We'll make up for what was stolen. Will we? I looked at him, this man who was my brother but felt like a stranger wearing familiar features. I don't know how to be your sister, Nikolai. I don't have memories of you teaching me to walk or protecting me from nightmares or any of the shared history that makes people family. We're just 2 people who happen to share blood and matching bracelets and parents we'll never get to know. Then we start from here, he said simply. We build something new instead of mourning what we lost. It won't be the relationship we should have had, but it can still be real. I wanted to believe him. Standing there in the cemetery where our parents were buried, I wanted to believe that blood and intention were enough to forge a bond across 25 years of separation. But I also knew it wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick, and some days we'd probably hate each other as much as we loved each other. Tell me something about them, I said. Something you remember. Nikolai smiled, and it transformed his usually cold features into something achingly young. Mother used to sing in Russian when she thought no one was listening. Father would pretend to be absorbed in his books, but I'd see him smile. And sometimes when she'd catch him listening, she'd sing louder, more dramatically, until he'd laugh and pull her into his lap and they'd forget I was in the room entirely. I felt tears burning. I wish I remembered that. So do I. The hybrid sanctuary took shape faster than I'd expected, built on Nikolai's resources and Tatiana's connections and my desperate need to create something that justified all the blood spilled in my name. We chose a location deep in the bayou, far enough from human and supernatural settlements to offer privacy, close enough to the compound for protection. The official opening ceremony drew an unexpected crowd. Vampires and werewolves who'd supported the council vote, hybrid survivors who'd spent decades hiding, even a few human liaisons who worked with the supernatural community. I stood before them all, 26 years old and terrified, explaining a vision I was still figuring out as I went. This sanctuary exists because hybrid children deserve what I never had. A place to understand their nature without shame, to learn control without fear, to grow up knowing they're not mistakes or abominations or political inconveniences. I looked at the gathered faces, seeing hope and skepticism in equal measure. You're not monsters. You're miracles. And this is where we prove it. Tatiana stepped forward, her werewolf authority lending weight to my words. I'll be teaching lycanthropy control, how to manage transformation, how to retain consciousness, how to distinguish instinct from impulse. And I'll handle vampire discipline, Gregor added, his ancient voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Blood management, political navigation, the history you'll need to survive in a world that doesn't quite know what to do with you yet. The first hybrid child to enroll was Celeste, the teenage girl I'd met weeks ago who'd been hiding in the bayou. She looked at me with something like worship, and I felt the weight of that expectation settle across my shoulders like a yoke. Don't make me your hero, I told her privately after the ceremony. I'm figuring this out same as you. But we'll figure it out together. The political restructuring was harder than establishing the sanctuary. Nikolai's proposal for a formal alliance with regional werewolf packs met resistance from vampires who saw it as weakness and werewolves who remembered centuries of betrayal. I attended every negotiation as his ambassador, living proof that cooperation between species wasn't just possible but could create something stronger than either bloodline alone. My parents died for this dream, I told a council of skeptical werewolf alphas during a particularly tense meeting. They died believing that love and unity were worth more than fear and division. I'm living for the same dream. The question is whether you'll let their deaths be meaningless, or whether you'll help me build what they died trying to create. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't politically sophisticated. But it was true, and sometimes truth was enough. The alphas agreed to preliminary trade agreements, mutual defense pacts in cases of external threat, and shared territories where both species could hunt without fear of ambush. Not peace. Not yet. But the foundation for it. On a quiet afternoon in March, I visited Anna's grave alone. The cemetery in Treme was nothing like the Gothic beauty of Lafayette, just simple headstones and practical markers for people who couldn't afford elaborate memorials. I found Anna's plot easily, the same grave I'd visited every week for 2 years after she died. I placed my thorn bracelet beside her headstone, the silver gleaming against the grass. Thank you for the life you gave me, I whispered. For 26 years of humanity when I could have been raised as a weapon or hidden as a shame. You gave me the perspective to be a bridge instead of choosing a side. You made me human enough to choose compassion over vengeance. I understood now why she'd lied, why she'd hidden the truth about what I was. Without those years of human grounding, the vampire bloodlust and werewolf rage might have consumed me before I learned to control them. Anna had given me the most precious gift possible. A childhood where I believed I was normal, where I learned kindness and restraint before I learned I had the power to destroy. I forgive you, I said, though she couldn't hear it. For the lies, for the secrets, for dying before you could tell me the truth. I forgive you because I finally understand. The bracelet stayed beside her grave. I didn't need it anymore to remember who I was. 6 months after the council chamber battle, I stood on the compound balcony with Nikolai, watching the sun set over New Orleans. We'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm, not the easy closeness of siblings raised together, but something hard-won and real. We argued about politics and laughed at dark jokes, only we understood and learned each other's boundaries the way strangers becoming family always did. Do you regret it? Nikolai asked suddenly. Learning the truth? Becoming this? I touched my wrist where the bracelet had been, feeling the faint indentation that would probably never fully fade. I regret the time we lost. I regret that our parents didn't get to see what we're building. I regret every hybrid child who died because Victor convinced people that difference was threat. I met his eyes. But I don't regret who I've become. I'm finally whole in a way I never was when I thought I was human. What if I fail you again? The vulnerability in his voice surprised me. What if I can't protect you from whatever comes next? I don't need protecting, Nikolai. I said it gently but firmly. I need a brother. Someone who stands beside me, not in front of me. Someone who trusts me to fight my own battles while knowing you're there if I need backup. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between us. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to keep trying. The full moon rose over the bayou and I felt the transformation call to me. Not the agonizing force it had been 6 months ago, but an invitation to become something beautiful and terrible and entirely mine. I shifted in the sanctuary's grounds, surrounded by other hybrids learning the same control, and ran through the swamps with vampire speed and werewolf joy. When I returned to the compound, Nikolai was waiting on the balcony. I was still half-shifted, covered in mud and glory, grinning like the wild thing I'd finally learned to embrace. Mother and father would be proud, he said softly. We're just getting started, I replied. Dawn broke over New Orleans, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, vampire and werewolf colors bleeding together. We stood side by side, two crowns forged into one, watching the city wake up to a world that was slowly, painfully beginning to change. The war wasn't over. Victor's supporters remained in hiding, plotting their return. Traditional vampires and werewolves still saw hybrids as abomination rather than evolution. And somewhere out there, other hybrid children were still living in fear, still believing they were alone. But for the first time in centuries there was hope. And sometimes hope was enough to start a revolution.